Before there were empires, before agriculture, before complex language, and long before we, Homo sapiens, even existed, another kind of human undertook one of the greatest journeys in history. They left the warm cradle of Africa and stepped into a continent that was not waiting for them, a cold, alien Europe dominated by colossal predators and brutal winters. They were the true pioneers, the first Europeans. But who were they? And how, with crude stone tools and likely no fire, did they survive in a world that seemed designed to destroy them? Our story begins 1.2 million years ago in what is now the Atapuerca Hills of northern Spain. Here, in a deep cave known as Cima del Elefante, the pit of the elephant, paleoanthropologists found a 1.2 million-year-old fragment of a human jawbone. It is the oldest, undisputed evidence of a human presence in Western Europe. This species, named Homo antecessor, or pioneer man, is a ghost in our family tree. They were not Neanderthals, and they were not us. They were another branch, an evolutionary experiment that walked into a mysterious dead end. What we know of them is pieced together from shattered bones and sharpened stones. They had surprisingly modern-looking faces, with high cheekbones and a more protruding nose, but a more primitive set of teeth and brow ridge. They were tall and robust, built for movement. But the world they stepped into was nothing like the Europe of today. It was a Pleistocene wilderness, lush forests alternated with vast grasslands, populated by a menagerie of giants. There were woolly mammoths, woolly rhinos, and giant deer with antlers as wide as a small car. And then there were the predators, not just wolves and bears, but monstrous versions of them. There were saber-toothed cats with dagger-like canines. There were European jaguars and giant hyenas, powerful enough to crush mammoth bones. This was a world where humans were not at the top of the food chain. We, or rather they, were prey. So how did they survive? The evidence from sites like Cima del Elefante suggests they were not great mammoth hunters. They were opportunistic scavengers and hunters of small game. Their tools, known as Oldowan stone tools, were brutally simple. They were river pebbles, crudely flaked to create a sharp edge, good for cutting meat or smashing bone to get to the marrow. They had no spears, no bows and arrows. Faced with a saber-toothed cat, their best weapon was a rock and the ability to run. But they had a far more powerful weapon, one that doesn't fossilize: the social group. Homo antecessor did not live alone. They moved in small, tight-knit bands, perhaps of 20 to 30 individuals. In a world full of predators, there was strength in numbers. They could work together to scare smaller predators off a carcass, to alert each other to danger, and to care for the young. It was this cooperation, this mutual dependence, that was the true innovation that allowed them to set foot in Europe. They conquered the continent not with force, but with the resilience of community. But there is a darker side to their survival story. At another site in Atapuerca, called Grandolina, scientists found the bones of at least 6 Homo antecessor individuals dating to around 800,000 years ago. But these were not burials. The bones were mixed in with animal remains, and they bore telltale marks, cut marks made by stone tools to strip the flesh, and signs of the bones being smashed open for marrow. Homo antecessor practiced cannibalism. The official history often explains this as nutritional cannibalism, a desperate measure to survive harsh winters when food was scarce. But some researchers suggest a more disturbing possibility. The victims were not just from rival groups. There's evidence of them consuming young members of their own group. Was this just about hunger? Or did it represent something else, a form of social violence or ritual that we cannot comprehend? The truth remains a mystery, a reminder that the inner world of these first Europeans is as alien to us as the landscape they walked. For hundreds of thousands of years, Homo antecessor and their descendants survived on the southern fringes of Europe, in places like Spain and Italy, where the climate was relatively mild. But Earth's history is not a straight line. The Pleistocene was a relentless cycle of glacial periods and warmer interglacials. Around 800,000 years ago, the Earth entered a colder, harsher phase. Massive ice sheets began to consume much of northern and central Europe. The climate became drier, colder, and far more unpredictable. For the first people of Europe, this was a survival test on a continental scale. The archaeological evidence from this period tells a striking story, a story of disappearance. Hominin sites north of the Alps, places that had been inhabited during warmer periods, suddenly go empty. It seems that as the ice advanced, humans retreated. They could not adapt. Europe, except for its warmest southern pockets, became a humanless land once more for tens of thousands of years. The first pioneers had failed. They had been defeated not by predators, but by the climate. This raises a fundamental question. What were they missing? Why couldn't they adapt to the cold? The answer may lie in one of the most important technologies in human history: fire. For us, fire is a given, but for the first Europeans, it may have been an alien thing. The definitive evidence for the controlled use of fire, carefully constructed hearths, systematically burned stones, only appears in the archaeological record around 400,000 years ago, much, much later. This means that for the first million years or so of human presence in Europe, they may have lived without the ability to create or sustain fire. Imagine that. No warmth on a freezing winter night, no light to keep predators at bay in a cave, no way to cook meat, making it more digestible and safer to eat. Without fire, survival in a Pleistocene winter north of the Alps was nearly impossible. But the story, however, is not so simple. Recently, at a 790,000-year-old site in Israel, archaeologists found evidence that hominins there were using fire. So why didn't this technology spread to Europe? Were the groups so isolated that such a critical discovery wasn't shared? Or was the ability to make fire discovered and then forgotten multiple times throughout early human history? The official history often presents technological progress as a straight, upward line, but perhaps our deep history is far more complex, full of advances and retreats, of knowledge gained and then lost to the chaos of climate cycles. The true conquest of Europe, the conquest of the cold northern lands, could only begin when a new human species appeared on the scene, one that had mastered both stone and fire. They were Homo heidelbergensis, the direct ancestors of the Neanderthals. At an incredible site in Schöningen, Germany, dated to between 300,000 and 400,000 years ago, archaeologists found a collection of weapons that would completely change our understanding of these people. Preserved in a peat bog, they found 8 exquisitely crafted wooden spears. These were not simple sharpened sticks. They were made from spruce trunks, with the center of gravity weighted at the front, just like a modern javelin. They were aerodynamically designed hunting weapons, built by craftsmen with a deep understanding of materials and physics. Alongside the spears, they found the remains of dozens of wild horses, many with butchery marks. This was the smoking gun. Homo heidelbergensis were not scavengers. They were coordinated hunters, capable of taking down large, fast-moving prey. They had made the transition from the hunted to the hunter. And at the same site, they also found clear evidence of the controlled use of fire. With spears in their hands and fire in their camps, humans finally had the toolkit they needed to face the European winter and win. The difference between Homo heidelbergensis and their predecessors was not just in their tools, it was in their skulls. Their brains were significantly larger, approaching the size of our own. This increase in brain size suggests a leap in cognitive abilities. They could plan complex cooperative hunts that required coordination and communication. They could transmit the complex skills needed to create sophisticated tools like the Schöningen spears. And perhaps they began to think in ways that we might recognize as human. The evidence for this new abstract mind comes from another incredible site, Cima de los Huesos, the Pit of Bones, also in the Atapuerca Hills of Spain. In a deep shaft inside a cave, scientists have found the remains of at least 28 Homo heidelbergensis individuals, dated to around 430,000 years ago. But this was not a random accumulation. The skeletons are all of adolescents and young adults. There are no predator marks and no signs of cannibalism. It appears that these bodies were deliberately thrown into the pit. And amongst the thousands of human bones, they found only a single solitary tool, a beautifully crafted hand axe made from an unusual red and yellow quartzite, nicknamed Excalibur. What does this mean? Many archaeologists believe that the Cima de los Huesos represents the earliest evidence of intentional funerary behavior, that this pit was a tomb, a sacred place, and that Excalibur, made from a rare material and carefully crafted, may have been a ritual object, a first offering to the dead. If this is true, the implications are profound. It suggests that these people were capable of symbolic thought. They had a concept of death that went beyond mere physical finality. They may have had the first glimmerings of ritual, of spirituality. For the first time, we are seeing the sparks of a mind grappling with the biggest questions of existence. From these Homo heidelbergensis, the Neanderthals would evolve, becoming the true masters of Ice Age Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. And eventually we, Homo sapiens, would arrive bringing with us art, complex language, and a new kind of consciousness. But the story of the conquest of Europe did not begin with us. It began with the first tentative footsteps of Homo antecessor, who dared to enter an alien world. It continued with the resilience of Homo heidelbergensis, who mastered fire and the hunt. Each species left a legacy, a toolkit, a set of survival strategies that the next would build upon. This deep history is a story of trial and error on an evolutionary scale. There were dead ends like Homo antecessor and incredible successes like the Neanderthals. It was not an inevitable march of progress leading to us. It was a complex, messy story of survival against all odds. As we look back across these 1.2 million years, we see not just other species. We see distant versions of ourselves. Beings driven by the same curiosity, the same need for social connection, and the same iron will to endure in a world that seemed unlivable. They were the pioneers, and the Europe we know today is built on the invisible foundation of their struggles and their triumphs. Human history is written not just in books, but in bone and in stone. What part of the story of these first Europeans surprised you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you're fascinated by the deep story of our own origins, consider subscribing to continue exploring the distant past.